We'll have all these like presentations, documents, and the recording and stuff posted to the Google Drive after this. We'll just send out like a message and a feedback form, of course. Yeah.
All right. So this
All right,
is
go for it.
sure. Yeah. So this is Purdue Boilerbots RMNA 2025 bid. So a little bit info about me first. I am the incoming president of Purdue RoboMaster for this season. In the past, I led the algorithm team for about a year and a half. And as a whole, we are very excited to have this opportunity to host. So starting off, this is our rough agenda. Well, we're going to start off by talking about our prior hosting experience, and then we'll get into our venue options. We also have some information on conference housing. We will then talk about our volunteer sourcing efforts, and finally, we will end our bid by talking about the attractions and travel for Purdue, a couple side events, and a rough timeline, and finally, our budget for the event. And I think Andy's Discord crashed, if you wouldn't mind adding him back in. But all right, so starting off, I'll talk about our hosting experience, and you could also caption this "Why choose Purdue." So I've outlined like three main reasons on here. The first one being our business team. They're highly capable, and we have put out a resume booklet for our sponsors consisting of resumes from our members. We do a lot of fundraising and sponsorships, so we are very well financed. And we also put out some very good media, including promo videos, Instagram posts, and things of that nature. Secondly, we have an events team, and they're responsible for designing, planning, and building our 1v1 field, which was used during our Midwest conference. Also, various practice spaces, our robot carnival, which I will bring up later, and also the little ramp, which if you attended Midwest conference, you were probably well versed with the shenanigans that we got up to using that ramp. And the last main consideration for why you should choose us, which I personally think is the biggest consideration, is our experience in hosting the Midwest competition or conference. We hosted this for 2 years already, and by the time RMNA 2025 comes around, we would have hosted 3 of these events. And I believe that this demonstrates our superior knowledge of the competition in terms of timetable and venue logistics, referees and volunteers, fundraising and budgeting, and things of that nature. And we also have experience with sponsor booths and also some mini games, and we have to set up our own AV, media, and communications. And on the bottom, you can see just a couple of select photos from our Midwest conference this past year. You can see in the bottom left our field. We have inspection towards the right, and then the remaining 2 images are of our referee station and a couple of our various members operating the event. So overall, I believe this event shows our commitment to excellence and also the ability to host a very successful and well-planned event. So the alternative title of this is why you should have RMNA where Axl Rose is from. I think that's actually probably more important than Midwest competition, so definitely keep that in mind. So now getting into a more serious topic, we'll start off by talking about the venue options. So our primary venue is the Purdue Armory, and this is a absolutely massive space. It is nearly 40,000 square feet. So if you look in the top right, you can see like a rough size comparison. You can see the 3v3 field, the 1v1 field, and also like a rough size estimate of the pits based on CU's pits. So there is a ton of room in this venue. It is absolutely massive. So there's a lot of room for side events, there's a lot of room for the field, and really anything else based on community input. And probably the best feature about this venue is it has no cost for rental. So this can open the opportunity for a lot of cost savings for us. And as was talked about with UCSD's presentation, we could either like add more events to kind of add to the competition as a whole, or we could allow for cost savings and potentially a lower entry fee if we decide for this to happen. And I'll just be clear with this: there's no upfront cost for the venue. However, I saw a question in chat about like AV and things like that. We'll cover like the miscellaneous items needed for the venue later on in the budget, so don't worry about that. And for availability, we actually placed a hold on the venue for July 12th through 17th. So we had the venue reserved, and this is not set in stone. So we would be able to change the venue, change the dates of the venue if we get community feedback that a better date range is available. But we do have this venue on hold, which is very good. And a couple drawbacks here is that this is just one large room, so that may be a little bit interesting in terms of setting up the venue. But if you look on the floor plan, there are actually some side rooms over here. I am not currently certain of availability of these. However, I can get in contact with the space manager and we could try to figure out renting these. Or, worst case scenario, we are able to place dividers and the space is large enough where ideally the noise would not be carrying so heavily. And another drawback is there is no AC to the best of my knowledge in this venue. So it would likely be pretty warm, but I do not believe it would be unbearable because I have looked up prior events occurring roughly in the spring and possibly summer. So it is not unheard of by any means to have an event in the Armory during the summer. So this is something I actually found online. Back in 2009, Purdue hosted a FIRST Robotics tournament within this space. So just so you can get like a rough estimate of size and what we're able to hold in here, I think this image will help. So back in 2009, the FIRST Robotics field was roughly about the same width as the RMNA field. So you're able to kind of get a depiction of what the venue would look like. And you can see they actually have very sufficient lighting, and they have like a stage up front with projectors, and they have side booths for sponsors and also some bleachers. So there is a lot of potential in this venue, I believe. And I've also identified a couple backup options, but these are definitely a little bit more uncertain, and I have to get in contact with people who operate these venues. But there is the Lambert Fieldhouse, which is on the north side of campus, and a little bit further away we have the Schwartz Tennis Center. So these are just some potential options for a backup facility. Now moving on to conference housing, Purdue actually does have a well-run conference housing program, and they claim that they have quality and affordable housing, which I would tend to agree with. And they also have award-winning dining services emphasizing choice and quality. And best of all, we do have AC in here, so no need to worry about that. And in the table down here, I've kind of listed out the rough prices for the conference housing. And the location of the conference housing is not set. There are actually very many options, so I would have to continue the discussion with the conference housing to narrow down a venue. But I believe almost all of them will have the prices be $60 a night for a single room, $35 for a double, and then the rough prices for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And I would have to figure out whether or not this would be included within a meal plan and the housing package, or if the food would be separate. This is something that I will be in discussion with. So now we'll move on from the venue and housing to volunteer sourcing. And we've identified three main sources for volunteers. The first one being Purdue itself. And we'll be providing a large portion of the volunteer team, and this can be through various contacts, such as our own team, other robotics clubs, such as Purdue SIGBOTS, Purdue FIRST, and other related groups on campus. And we actually have pretty good corporate relations with a couple companies like AndyMark who have contacts within FIRST Robotics, and we could likely seek their advice and potentially help for volunteer sourcing. And then other teams have a much more minor role in volunteering. We would definitely appreciate some help with field setup and teardown, and also cleaning up the projectiles between matches, so that would be much appreciated. And finally, RMNA, the operations team, will provide the roles that require a lot more training, such as the head refs, head inspectors, and media personnel, so like the casters. And the exact specifics of the volunteer plan will be developed in the coming months. So as for attractions at Purdue, you can see we have a very, very nice cricket, and we have a tumbleweed. So I know you guys are very much going to enjoy this, but also I'm entirely joking, I promise. We actually have some pretty good attractions at Purdue, and here is just to name a couple. One of them is, I personally really like the food at Purdue. We have a lot of good restaurants a bit east of campus in downtown West Lafayette. And there's a lot of pizza places, there's a couple Italian places, a lot of Asian food, there's some boba, there's just bar food. We have basically anything you can think of. We also have access to some hiking. I believe the image on the left is from the horticulture park, which is west of campus. And Purdue as a whole, I think, is very, very walkable. Actually, the street that a lot of the conference housing is on is totally blocked off, and you're able to just walk down freely. There's no cars, just bikes. So it would be a very straight shot from our ideal housing over to the venue. We also have some pretty good scenery. The top two images here are a couple buildings, the left one being the Neil Armstrong Hall of Engineering, which is a quite famous building. Neil Armstrong is actually a Purdue grad, for those of you who did not know that. And then the image on the right is the Bechtel Innovation and Design Center, which is kind of a maker hub. Pretty cool building. And then we have the Purdue Arch, which is right on our engineering mall. So there are quite a few things for scenery. And finally, we also have an active student board who could potentially assist us. And there are some other neat businesses in the area. I believe one of these is a cat cafe in the bottom right. Harry's Chocolate Shop is not a chocolate shop. It is a bar. And there's also a couple very good boba places for those who would be interested in that. All right, and now for some travel information. How do you get to Purdue? We actually have an airport at Purdue, which is kind of interesting. I believe it just opened for flights, so I'm not totally sure of the availability or anything like that. But besides that, we have the Indianapolis airport, which is about an hour from Purdue, so very reasonable drive from the airport. And we also have the O'Hare International Airport near Chicago, which is around 2 hours from Purdue. And they do have shuttle services. I have taken them before, and they're very nice. And if you plan on driving, it is actually a very good option. So the green little ping here is Purdue. And within 3 hours, there are a couple teams. And then within a 9-hour drive, there are a lot more teams. And then if you guys really, really like driving, you could drive the 16 hours. And then that encapsulates very, very many teams, almost all of them. So it is a very good location if you want to drive or fly. So now moving on to a couple of the fun things. We have quite a few specialty side events that we could host. A couple of the more typical things would include sponsor and team presentations, so a bit like a tech talk. We actually had one of these at our Midwest conference, so we just booked like a separate room, and teams were able to kind of display any technical progress that they've made in a slideshow to everybody else. And we still have our 1v1 field from the Midwest conference, so we could potentially do something with that. We could possibly just have the field set up and you could just run your own matches off the referee system. We could maybe host like separate events. Definitely open to community input on that one. We also have a ramp in Rune. This is still up for debate a little bit, but we definitely have the ramp, which you'll again remember if you went to Midwest Conference. We jumped a couple robots off of it and it was pretty fun. And finally, the world famous Robot Carnival, which is we basically set up one of our robots inside of an enclosed area, and you're able to take aim and launch as many projectiles that you want at various items on these shelves. And the goal is just to knock them all down as fast as you can, and that actually ended up being a pretty good competition, so we'd be glad to bring that back. So now for our rough timeline, this is definitely subject to change, but just so you guys can have a rough picture of what we'd be working on. As of now, a successful pitch. We will begin internal planning following this event, if we were chosen. And then starting in around September, we continue our search for sponsors and also trying to book alternative venues because of the drawbacks of the current venue. And then in around February, or perhaps a little bit earlier, we'll begin team registration for the event. We'll finalize any field fabrication changes that need to be taken on our side, and we'll also finalize our event timeline for the spring. And come spring, we actually intend on using the Midwest Conference partially for testing of any RMNA planning. So one option is we could use our chosen venue for RMNA as a venue for Midwest, and then we could seek community input or operator input on any things that they want us to test just to make sure the event is very smooth. And we would also provide team travel information and catering information at around this time. And then come summer, we would put on our finishing touches on the any plans that we have for the competition. And then come June and July, we would have the event execution, which would include setup, volunteer mobilization, and final training, the competition itself, and then also teardown. And in our last couple slides here is our rough budget. I did say that the event has no upfront cost for rental. However, I have decided to include around $10,000 just for venue as a whole. If we end up changing the venue or if there are any associated costs with additional equipment for the venue, I believe it's smart to have a buffer here, so I have included that. Around $4,000 will be the volunteer costs, and I should mention that these like rough estimates as a whole um, have been created based on feedback from like prior teams who have hosted RMNA. So I'm not just making these up. I would believe these to be relatively accurate. And we have about 2,500 for AV and other equipment, and I've added a $2,000 kind of buffer for any miscellaneous items that happen to come up because that will always happen. And this will put our total budget at around 18,500. However, if we are able to get the venue at no cost, such as sticking with the Armory, this could drop down to as low as 8,500, which is very, very nice. And now, how are we going to fund this event? My rough plan for this is around 60% of the required financing will come from corporate and department sponsors. We have very good relationships with our existing sponsors, and I'm confident that we'll be able to bring in more. One idea that we had is we could open up a separate or modified event package, which is basically the sponsors could modify or increase their current donation amount to be specific for the RMNA competition. And around 40% of our budget will come from the registration fees. And this is based on information that I've gotten in the past about the fee for 3v3 being roughly $350 and for 1v1 being approximately $100. And if you go ahead and do the math on this, then 60% comes out to be roughly $10,000 or $11,000, and then the registration fee is around $7,000, which is perfectly in line with at least, I believe, CU's or perhaps UW's registration fee. So this is definitely in line and realistic. And then finally, a couple miscellaneous items like T-shirts and other like gizmos that we decide to sell. This will not be a big point of like financing for the event. Probably like a couple thousand at most. So this will just be for anything that I've forgotten or any like miscellaneous things that come up that we could not cover in our original budget. So I believe that is roughly all I have for our bid here. But I did just want to say that from Purdue as a whole, we're definitely committed to making this competition as successful as possible. I believe that we have demonstrated our hosting experience, and we are very committed to making this event as well run and as successful as we can. And we aim to not only expand the RoboMaster North America community, but make the event more fun for everybody involved. So I'm going to open up the floor to any Q&A. I believe a record was being kept of questions, so I'll scroll up a little bit. I'll probably miss some of these, but let me see which ones I can find.
Coach, what's the public transit like?
Okay, so we do have like a bus system. I believe a lot of the buses don't operate in the summer, but there are a couple that I believe go north to Walmart, and a couple other like hardware stores and some restaurants. I probably wouldn't depend on it, but it is available if you have to go make a run to like Walmart or something or get food. I'll start from the bottom here. So, are you able to provide tables and chairs for the pits? We definitely plan on providing tables and chairs, so don't worry about that. Is there Italian food? There is Italian food. Thank you, Mason, for answering that. Also, Lewis, we have pretty good Italian food. At least I believe so. Let's see what else we have.
Are there other costs like with UCSD, AV fees, security fees, insurance, that sort of stuff?
I'm not currently aware of these. I would have to probably reach out regarding these. My
Okay.
current knowledge is just that the venue has no rental fee, but there definitely would be costs related to setting up the venue, whether that be like projectors or any other equipment there. How is the climate at Purdue since there's no AC? I looked at the averages, and I think it's roughly like mid 70s to high 70s. So again, I'll be transparent here. It definitely would be warm if there's no AC, but I do not believe it would be unbearable. And I will be stepping foot within the armory in just a few weeks. So if it's terrible, then I will not make you guys suffer through that. So, if you won the bid, would you still try to host Midwest Conference? Absolutely. A couple more questions.
Are dining
For dining
halls
halls,
open?
Yeah, there are
dining
dining halls
halls.
that are open. Yes. Vendors, I'm not totally sure about many of these. I'd expect a lot of them will be closed, but roughly like 10 to 15 minutes walk from our proposed venue is downtown West Lafayette, and there are like a ton of good restaurants there. There are also a couple west, which are closer to the residence halls.
We have a question in the document. Do you know if the backup venues have air conditioning?
Um, Let me go make sure I'm not misremembering. I am not sure, so I could definitely check on that. I want to remember the first one that I listed. Sorry. I want to say the field house should have AC, but I will follow up on this. Mason says yes, they
Mason's
do.
saying they
Okay,
do.
okay. Thank you, Mason.
There's a question about the Armory's policy for monetization, because that's something that a few venues have.
I've not heard anything about this. I do know that they have hosted many events there in the past with sponsors and other things like that. So I don't anticipate that'll be a problem, but this is something that I could definitely reach out to them to confirm.
Derek brings up a good point. Any other questions?
Oh yeah, that is a good point from Derek. Yeah, I wouldn't expect that to be a problem.
Okay, if there's nothing else, we can move on to our last presentation of the day.
All right, thank you all.
All
Thank
right,
you.
thank you, Purdue.
I'll bring you up. Jim, got anyone you want to